Alright, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the Unreal Engine framework fundamentals, things like the different blueprint actors, what are actors, and how we're going to use things like child blueprints and inheritance to not only allow us to create multiple different items in our games, but to scale our game in a way that is similar to how many AAA studios have set up their games. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. So in our project here in our main folder, if I right click here, we're going to create a basic asset. And so we have this blueprint class here. So if I click on this, this is going to show us all the different actors. So we have the first thing here, which is an actor. Now, if you don't know what an actor is, we have this nice little explanation. An actor is an object that can be placed or spawned in the world. Okay, so an actor or a blueprint actor is a very simple blueprint. And if I click on that, you can see we have this new blueprint actor. Okay, so I've opened this up. It's going to look a lot familiar to our character blueprint. So you see we have like a viewport here. We have our different components. We have our little event graph. We can add blueprint nodes in here. And we have variables that we can add. So really an actor can be anything that you want to design. So in this course, we're going to be using this actor class to create things like our different items. We're going to create our building structures, foundations, walls, all that stuff is going to be built using this actor blueprint. Okay, so let me delete this. And you don't have to create the classes that I'm creating right now. It's just for learning purposes. But if we go back to this blueprint class, the next thing that we have, or the next class that we have, is a pawn. So the description here is a pawn is an actor that can be possessed and receive input from a controller. So very similar to the character, a pawn can be things like, a car, a horse, like a mount, any sort of vehicle like a plane. That can basically be a pawn. The difference between a pawn is, you can either possess it or unpossess it at any time, and the player isn't always possessing a pawn at any given time, right? So like, for example, a ship or a car, player isn't always going to be driving the car, unless of course, it's a racing game. The difference is we have a character, and a character is a type of pawn that includes the ability to walk around. So a character basically is essentially a pawn, but the character also has things like the mesh, the skeletal mesh. It has a movement component, so this handles like the walk speed, jumping, and all that stuff. We have this player controller. A player controller is basically assigned to every player that joins the game. Now, it has nothing to do with, an actual like Xbox controller or something like that. Basically, this is a blueprint class that you can store logic related to the player controls. So for example, if you were to hit escape on your keyboard, it would bring up like an options menu or something like that. You would put all that in the player controller. And you're going to see throughout this course we put some of those controls inside of the controller and some of those controls inside of the character. And you'll understand why we've designed it that way. But just know that you can, put various different controls in either of these two different blueprint classes. The next one down here is a game mode base. So a game mode is a class where you'd store all the rules of the game. So things like, the score, like it says right here. Say if you were doing like a capture the flag mode, inside of your game mode, you'd store, the rules, like how many points does it take to win the game? Where do the flags spawn? It's a class that you can use to have all of that blueprint logic inside. That way you don't have it, scattered throughout your different classes, like in your character class or anything like that. So, for like a battle royale mode, you'd have the spawning of the players. All that stuff would be the scoring, how many players are left. All that stuff would be handled inside of this game mode base class. Now, actor component, if you remember in our character, we have these different components in here. And all that an actor component is basically like a custom component that you can add inside of a blueprint. So when I create a actor component, once I've created it, I can add it in the components of any sort of blueprint. And we will use this in this course because we're going to create a inventory component and store all of the logic related to our inventory inside of this component. So it's really nice because you can add this component to whatever blueprint you want. Like for example, we're going to build a building system that's going to have, structures like a chest, a storage box, a forge, and all those things are going to have like an inventory component so that our player can access the inventory inside of it. And so having this actor component, means that we can add it to those different structures so that it can have an inventory system. Now, scene components, I don't necessarily use this type of class, but basically those are the main different classes inside of Unreal Engine. Now, there are more classes if you expand the all classes here. You have things like vehicles, various different classes, all sorts of other different actors, Niagara actor, player camera manager, just a bunch of different other blueprint classes that you can create. And each class has their unique logic and has their own unique use case scenario. The next thing that I want to discuss is inheritance and child classes. So the way that we're going to design the different items inside of our game. So for example, we're going to have a blueprint actor, and this blueprint actor is going to be called, our BP item master. So we're going to have a master blueprint for our items, and then what we're going to do with that blueprint item master, but we're going to right click and create a child blueprint class, and basically we're going to have a child of our item master that's going to be, say, an equipable master. So we're going to have an item master, and then underneath that we're going to have an equipables. And then in our equipables we might have things like tools, weapons, and then in your weapons you could have under the weapons a rifle, a spear, and all those different classes. So the way we're designing this is we're going to have a master item, and then underneath that we're going to have our equipables. And so inside the equipables we're going to handle things like equipping an item to your player's hand. Then underneath that, we're going to have things like, the different weapons. So we'll have like a rifle. And then inside of that rifle class, or inside of that rifle blueprint, we're going to have all of like the firing logic inside of that class. And the reason why we're designing it in this way, where, we have a master class and then underneath it we have all of our other classes, and the reason why we want to design our game like this is because we don't want to have, the rifle and all that item logic inside of our character blueprint. And we want to have these different blueprint classes and all of the logic that is pertaining to them, we want to have it in the right class. And this is basically Inheritance 101, because as we move along further, you're going to see that we can call certain functions from the master blueprint inside of the child blueprint. This will also allow for adding many different types of items without affecting the performance of your game, because you're going to have all of the blueprint logic inside of those different item classes rather than having it all inside of one main class, like what you normally see being taught in tutorials online. You'll see people putting all of the different weapons, all of the different abilities inside of your character blueprint, which is totally fine if you're making a simple game. But when you're making something super advanced and you have 20 to 50 different items that all have unique abilities, like a rifle that has a certain amount of ammo and can reload, versus a rocket launcher that uses rockets, and then you have a bow. You have all these different items that have different logic inside of them. So rather than having all of that inside of one main class, we're going to have it separated into different blueprint classes. Now, I hope this lecture wasn't too confusing. Like I said, you don't have to worry about, not understanding fully everything that I'm saying right now. And in fact, once you're working through the course, you can reference back to this lecture and you will better understand the principles that I'm discussing in this lecture. So that is it for this lecture. In our next lecture, I'm going to really quickly show you guys how to push all of our changes, our custom character that we just created. We want to push all those changes to source control. That way we can have all that stuff backed up, and that way you guys can get into the regular habit of making your own pushes after watching a couple of lectures. So with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next lecture.